Murder and Such contains true stories about murders, the macabre, true crime, serial killers, and other dark subject matter. This includes adult themes, explicit language, descriptions of gore, violence, and other information provided by news articles, witness testimony, and public record. Murder and Such is not intended for all audiences, and although warnings will be set in place, listener discretion is still advised.
Hello, I would like to thank you for joining me on yet another episode of Murder and Such. My name is Hunter, and I'll be taking you on a journey into some of the darkest cases from around the world. This show, of course, is not intended for younger audiences. But as I do with each and every episode, I kick things off with a bit of housekeeping, if you want to call it that. And that means Patreon shoutouts. So, I would love to thank my newest patron by the name of Michaela Reeder for jumping on the page, and I would also love to thank my new executive producer, who goes by Caitlin Poehler, for donating to the show, and I'd also like to thank the lovely Miss Erin Albertson for upgrading to the executive producer level, and also a congratulations to Erin for her recent engagement. And last but not least, I would love to thank one of my longtime listeners and friends by the name Ashley Collier for jumping on the executive producer level. So thank you, Ashley, but also thank you to Caitlin, Erin, and Michaela for being so generous and helping fund the back end of this show. And if you would like to help out like they did, you can find the Patreon page at patreon.com/murderandsuch, where you can get the show early, ad-free, be entered into some exclusive drawings like I just did this past week, and get exclusive stickers. If not, since I did talk a lot of shit on my recent episode about QAnon, a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts would help me out more than you could ever imagine. And if you take a picture of it, I'll even send you some free stickers if you want them. So, thank you for all of your love, your donations, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me on this episode. It's going to be a wild ride. I'm not going to start off this episode easy. I'm going to cover some things unthinkable, some things unsettling. Some would even call them depraved. But before I get into that aspect of this episode, I'm going to ask you one single question. Have you ever really thought about killing someone? I'm not talking about the asshole who cut you off in traffic, the Mormons knocking on your door at 9 a.m. on a Sunday, and I'm not talking about the FedEx driver who left an undeliverable note on your door even though you were home the entire time. I'm talking about someone that you've thought about for days, weeks, maybe even years. To what degree do you hold your animosity towards them? What was the cause? Do you think that you could take this person's life? What if it's Kevin? Good old bumbling, stupid Kevin, just walking through the office and decided he was going to dump an entire pot of chili on the floor and everyone else had to clean it up. Is that worth taking somebody's life? Most likely not. What if it's the drunken asshole who gets a DUI and possession charge back in the mid-2000s, but wants to give you life lessons on a daily basis? Worth killing? Probably not either, because that's just an ignorant asshole being an asshole and putting others' lives at risk. But right now, you're probably thinking of the person that you might have thought about killing. Whether it's a lover's quarrel or a personal vendetta, we have all thought about killing someone. Hell, we're mammals. We're predators. We live off the nutrients that come from plants, but most likely other animals. So a quick sorry to my vegan listeners, but it's true. Through nature, killing is sometimes a sport. Sometimes it's for protection of their pack or for food. But what makes us so civilized? Because we've adapted throughout history to have morals, to have ethics. We're still flesh, blood, and bone like all other hunters out there. We have a justice system for killing somebody. Well, maybe unless you're a Louisville Metro police officer. But the animal kingdom lives off of the system of survival of the fittest. The consequences for one animal killing another? A feast, maybe a safe pack. I know, it's getting pretty dark up in this place. But what if there was another reason for killing someone? What if it's just the thrill of doing something that you've never done before, just for that hit of adrenaline? A thrill kill is premeditated murder that is motivated by the sheer excitement of the act. While there have been attempts to categorize multiple murders, such as identifying thrill killing as the most hedonistic, actual details of events frequently overlap category definitions, making attempts at such distinctions problematic. Those identified as thrill killers are typically young males, but other profile characteristics may vary, according to Jack Levin, director of Brudnick Center on Conflict and Violence at Northeastern University. The major common denominator with those who commit thrill killings is that they usually feel inadequate and are driven by a need to feel powerful. Levin stated, quote, "To a certain extent, they make their victims suffer so that they can feel good. Sadism is fairly common in thrill killings. The killer might torture, degrade, or rape their victims before they take their life." End quote. They frequently have an ideal victim type who has certain physical characteristics. Thrill killers have frequently been romanticized in films, such as Oliver Stone's 1994 film, Natural Born Killers. But what would drive somebody to commit such a horrific act? Is it boredom? A lack of excitement in their life? The question of trying something that you've never done before? Maybe feeling inadequate? There's a lot of factors that can go into it. Any single one of them is definitely not coming from someone with a stable thought process. Revenge is something that can be seen as justified in certain contexts, but a thrill kill, just to know what it's like to hold the life of another person in your hands and finally take it away, that is a completely different subject. In this episode, I will be covering 3 different topics, and one of them was deemed a full-on thrill kill. One that didn't start off as an intentional homicide, but the thrill of that one led to the death of an innocent person. And the last one is, well, you'll just have to listen to the episode to find out. But as always, my name is Hunter, and you're listening to Murder and Such, and this is episode 71, Thrill Kills. October 21st, 2009. A cool autumn day in Missouri. a high of 65 degrees, low humidity, and the sights of Halloween on the houses that lined the streets. A normal day, as it would seem to practically anyone, but for one teenager, it was a day, a decision, and an act of violence that would shatter the world around her. 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante was most definitely a juvenile, but also a very troubled teenager. She had been battling with depression for quite some time. She was known to also self-harm, and had even taken a few attempts at her own life. For the attempt, she was hospitalized and was going through inpatient, then outpatient therapy. She was also given a medication known as fluoxetine, otherwise known as Prozac. Prozac works well for some, but when it comes to mental health disorders, there is no one pill that will fix everything. Prozac, much like any antidepressant, changes the chemical nature of your brain. With me taking Zoloft for a few years now, it's worked out well for me, but it does not work out for every single person that's out there. Alyssa was a child, and her parents were not around due to the fact that her mother was pregnant with Alyssa at a very young age. Her father was currently serving a 10-year sentence for assault. Alyssa was in the care of her grandparents when this had taken place, but she also had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister as well. Alyssa was also, unfortunately, sexually abused as a child, and while at the time she was not diagnosed, she was confirmed later to have multiple personality disorders. Both of these can have a very adverse effect on a child. Sexual assault can lead to PTSD, depression, anger, and some would also say that it can manifest into the multiple personalities as well, for somebody trying to escape the person who had been assaulted. Now, you may be thinking that I'm justifying what had taken place on that day, but I'm not. There's no justification to any part of this story. But a lot of these factors are relevant to what happened with 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. Now, Alyssa was, I guess you could say, a scene kid. We talked about that on the last episode. 15 years old, she was active on the internet and even had a YouTube channel in which she uploaded a video of her and her 2 younger brothers taking turns touching an electrified cattle fence on their grandparents' property. In the video, you can see red text that titles, "Idiots Getting Electrocuted by an Electric Fence. Jackass Stunt." In the beginning, which I would play the audio from it, but the audio is really horrible quality. But if you want to find it, just YouTube Alyssa Bustamante electric fence video. But at the beginning, Alyssa is wearing a Nightmare Before Christmas hoodie, and not long after the start of it, she grabs the fence wire and, obviously, is shocked. Then a cut again with the red text that says, quote, "This is where it gets good. Heh. We get to see my brothers get hurt," end quote. Then followed by her brothers, who actually seem pretty scared, and they grab the fence, maybe, but they're kids, so they might have actually gotten shocked, and their demeanor is very joking. But at the end of the video, which overall is about 2 minutes long, it states, quote, "Hope you enjoyed seeing us get hurt," then followed by the names of her and her brothers, which I will be omitting from this. Then after the names, it says, "The 3 idiots, lols," and, quote, "Kids, don't try this at home," end quote. Now, a lot of factors should be addressed with childhood trauma and adverse effects with medication. Prozac has led to some pretty awful experiences with some of the people who have used it. The thing about mental health is that you can hope and think that the first bout of therapy or the first prescription that you were given will do the trick. But honestly, it's a long and arduous process. You can't just wake up one day, take your pill, and everything is just fine. It takes time to build up into your system, and even after that, you're still going to have bad days where you don't want to get out of bed, you just want to sleep your entire life away, and days where you can straight up just hit a brick wall and break down for no reason. It's similar to the flu shot. You can still get the flu, but maybe the after effects aren't as bad. But you also have to be honest with yourself. If the medication isn't working, you just need to be honest. Sure, there's the test period where it builds up into your system, but if it's not working after that, you have to tell someone. And Alyssa did. She tried telling her therapists, her friends, and her family about it, but nothing changed with her intake. It was also said that some people took notice that her demeanor was becoming more dark and aggressive and a lot more erratic. At such a young point in someone's life, sure, we know the difference between right and wrong, but when someone is mentally unwell, has little to no support or help, something that happened with Alyssa that made her do the unthinkable. October 16th, 2009. Alyssa heads out to a wooded area just behind her house. Armed with only her two hands, she proceeds to dig 2 holes in the ground. But why 2? Well, Alyssa had been fascinated with the thought of what it would be like to kill someone. On her YouTube and MySpace profiles, it listed her hobbies as cutting and killing people. Kind of edgy, yes. But the reason why she was digging these 2 holes was she was intending on murdering her 2 brothers and burying their bodies in these shallow graves. But when the day finally rolled around on October 21st of 2009, she had decided not to take her 2 brothers' lives. Instead, she found a 9-year-old girl named Elizabeth Olton, a neighbor from 4 houses down, who was walking home from her friend's house. Alyssa had coerced Elizabeth to following her to the wooded area, and then Alyssa proceeded to put her hands around this little girl's throat, then proceeded to strangle her. And I'm not trying to make this sound like it's not violent, but strangling somebody definitely takes time and effort. And that's when Alyssa pulled out her contingency plan, and she grabbed a knife and proceeded to slit Elizabeth's throat, then plunged the knife into her chest. Elizabeth screamed out as much as she could, but Alyssa had held her blood-covered hands over Elizabeth's mouth and watched the life drain from her eyes. She then proceeded to drag her body to one of the holes, placed Elizabeth's body inside, and covered the hole in dirt and leaves. But why would she have done this? Alyssa had then gone to her room and confessed to it by scripting her admissions in her diary. And this is what her entry had said. I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my god, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. I gotta go to church now. LOL. End quote. Alyssa wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Alyssa was a very troubled teen, and trust me, like I said, I am not justifying this in any way. But if she had gotten the help that she needed, and people took her warning signs seriously, maybe Elizabeth Olten would still be alive today. But that's not the case, unfortunately. That night, Elizabeth's mother had told her that she needed to be back by dinner time, but she never showed up. She called the authorities, and into the night and morning, a search ensued for this little missing girl. Elizabeth was described by her mother as a happy little girl, and in the pictures I saw of Elizabeth, she had shoulder-length dark brown hair, brown eyes, and her whole life ahead of her. The search party resulted in the FBI being called in to investigate where this little girl had gone to. They interviewed Elizabeth's parents, they interviewed neighbors, Alyssa's grandparents, and even interviewed Alyssa herself. After they interviewed her, Alyssa went to her diary and attempted to scribble out the entry that she made admitting to killing someone. She had even told investigators that someone probably kidnapped Elizabeth, and whoever had done it deserved to be convicted for it. Not long after, they found a hole in the wooded area behind Alyssa's house. When they asked her what the hole was there for, she said that she just liked to dig holes. But shortly after that was when they came to the freshly moved earth, and forensics were called in. And that's when they uncovered the body of Elizabeth Olten that was buried in this shallow grave with wounds to her neck, arms, and chest. And after a short time, the FBI seized the diary of Alyssa's, and they brought her in for interrogation. When she was questioned, she had told the Missouri Highway Patrol sergeant named David Rice that she, quote, wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone, end quote. And right there is where we have it. That sort of admission is one that she had told close friends, and is definitely a thought process of somebody who is mentally unwell. It was said that her grandparents were somewhat strict. And with that being said, I'm not saying that they told her to do it, but as much as mental health concern and care has progressed over time, there's almost some sort of a generational issue with taking mental health seriously. But again, I am not putting the death of Elizabeth on Alyssa's grandparents' hands. She was unwell, and now she got her wish and became a murderer or a thrill killer. Now, almost a month later, she was arraigned in court and pled not guilty to the count of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. They wanted to try her as an adult. She was being held without bond and was ordered to undergo immediate psychiatric therapy and mental health intervention. But they actually waited until after her 18th birthday before she was entered in and accepted a plea deal. Her initial trial was supposed to start on January 30th, 2 days after she became a legal adult. The trial was, however, delayed, and with Alyssa's own admission, she pled guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action because of the knife that was used in the process. Alyssa, now of sound state and mind, admitted to murdering Elizabeth Olten. But there was still testimony to go through. Psychiatrists on the defense team had stated that at the time of the murder and the following years undergoing psychiatric evaluations and the like, that Alyssa was, quote, psychologically damaged and severely emotionally disturbed. Anybody who's familiar with the case would definitely agree with these circumstances. But for her sentencing, Alyssa had received life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She could walk out a free woman one day when she is 48 years old. But will that happen? I don't know. She's only currently 8 years into her sentence. But will that ever bring back Elizabeth Olten? No. Nothing will, unfortunately. The human brain is such a fragile thing. The chemicals, the receptors, the thought process that everyone has is unique to themselves. Of course, I'm going to wish that she had gotten the help that she needed. But Alyssa fully admitted to the murder and will be spending the majority of her adult life behind bars, while the family of Elizabeth Olten will never be able to know who she could have been and the life that she could have lived. All at the hands of a senseless thrill kill. Now for the second one for this episode, I'm going to bring up not one person, but 5 people. October 18th, 2017, Vienna Township, Michigan. We've all been kids, and most of us have done some, arguably, dumb shit. As a male, I can attest that sometimes peer pressure can kick in, and sometimes the energy that's being fed between friends can be volatile. Hell, think of the movie Stand By Me. Excellent movie, but it's a bunch of boys just trying to go and see a dead body and their adventure along the way. Personally, for me, it was speeding in my car when I was 16. Yes, I got a ticket for it. Or skateboarding with my buddies on property that we weren't supposed to be skating on. But doing things that are, well, dangerous can somewhat give you a hit of adrenaline or, you guessed it, a thrill. McCaden Payne, Trevor Gray, Alexander Miller, Mark Selesky, and Kyle Anger were 5 friends out looking for that thrill. Something to get their blood pumping. And Kyle was the oldest of the boys at 17 years old. And then they found themselves at an overpass that crossed over Interstate 75, and they had the idea to get their little hit of adrenaline. The boys started gathering rocks from a dead end around the area, some small, some medium-sized, and one that weighed nearly 20 pounds, and they loaded them up into the back of Kyle's pickup truck and headed off to the overpass to play their little game they so poignantly referred to as overpassing. This had apparently been somewhere around their 10th time, which was reported by the Genesee County Sheriff's Office Detective Jason Murphy. You probably guessed it, but the boys spent some time on the Dodge Road overpass watching cars go by and timing their throws just right where they would hit passing vehicles. But as I said, sometimes the energy can be volatile. And the next boy trying to one-up the one prior, asserting their dominance amongst the pack. Cars were damaged, whether it be dents, scrapes, or chip in the windshield. I'm gonna be honest, Interstate 75 isn't the cleanest interstate in America. A friend of mine just a few months back had a rock kickback at his windshield, and he had to have the whole thing replaced. But when it's after 8 o'clock at night on an October evening, you can't really see if someone is on top of an overpass and is chucking rocks onto your car. But at around 8:30 p.m. that night, 911 dispatchers received a phone call from a man named Stephen Author, who was driving southbound on I-75. I do have a segment of that phone call, but it's incredibly hard to hear. I will play it, and then I will break it down after it's done. So here is that audio clip.
I'm on 75. I'm going to end myself. Something comes through the windshield. My buddy's pointing at. Okay, do you know what might hit him? No, I have no idea. We're driving along, coming down the pit. There's something moving through my windshield and hitting. Kenny, talk to me, buddy. Kenny, come on. Hey, Kenny, wake up. Kenny, talk to me, pal. Buddy, I gotta go. Buddy, now. Get the hell out of here. Kenny, come on, man. Come on. Don't do this to me, buddy. There's something on the road, man. What, did you drop something in the road? Where are you? Yeah, where's the ambulance, man? They're on their way to you right now. We're trying to find you. You told me that you were on 75 near Mount Morris. They're not finding you in that area. Are you over by are you north of Francis? I'm on 75 before you get to the Mount Morris exit, dude. 75 south before you get to the Mount Morris exit. I was going south. Okay, what's he doing? He's gurgling, man. He's gurgling. Okay. Do you see the ambulance? No, man. I don't see nothing. Okay, Steve, they're looking for you. They're in the right area for you, okay? They're working on getting there for you, okay? I just need you to keep pressure on the neck for me, all right? You're doing great. Hey, come on, we got that fishing trip to go to, remember? Hey.
That audio tape was actually played in the courtroom. You can hear people sniffling and their sorrow, because that phone call is from Stephen. And Stephen was driving home with his co-worker, 32-year-old Kenneth White, when they were greeted by a large stone thrown off of the overpass, which entered the passenger side of the vehicle, making contact with Kenneth's head and chest. The size of the rock was 5 inches by approximately 8 inches and weighed about 6 pounds. Kenneth, or Kenny, was a father of 4, and he had a fiancée waiting for his return back home after a construction job. You can hear Stephen talking at the end about a fishing trip they were supposed to take. But unfortunately, Kenny didn't survive the attack, and the extent of his injuries were fractures to his skull, his chest, and ribs, a crushed eye socket, among more facial injuries. The person who ended up throwing the fatal rock was 17-year-old Kyle Anger. Now, after throwing the rock, all 5 of the boys hightailed it out of the area and went and got food at a local McDonald's. The feelings were obviously tense, and the boys hadn't known that they had just killed a man. So they were out there for the thrill, but ultimately it became a thrill kill. The autopsy's final report of the injuries that Kenneth had sustained were lacerations and abrasions to the head and face, a skull fracture, an injury to the brain, a fracture to the facial skeleton, huge lacerations to the chest, a broken clavicle, and broken ribs. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, and the manner of death was deemed a homicide. But with the officers arriving on scene, they found multiple cars parked on the side of the road that were damaged by falling rocks. And they had no idea who had just killed this man. The next day, the boys had learned of the murder of Kenneth White. So they started to message each other in a Snapchat group, thinking that it wouldn't be tracked like a standard text message would. But that was later recovered by the authorities with a search warrant. They had sent messages such as, quote, "No one saw us. If everyone shuts up, we won't get caught." Another exchange between them, Kyle had said, quote, "We could go to prison for life for this. Everyone lay down and no one rat us out," end quote. Unfortunately for Kyle, police had checked the cameras that were around the areas of the overpass, and from there, corresponding with time, they found a truck that had driven away from the scene belonging to none other than Kyle Anger. Also notable, they wanted to know if anyone else was involved with the case. The authorities were able to obtain the surveillance footage from that McDonald's that they had eaten at, and were able to identify all 5 of the boys together and congregating. Now, considering this timeline and this investigation matching up, they were able to issue warrants for all 5 of the boys, and they were told to turn themselves in by 10 p.m. on Sunday, October 21st, since none of them were of adult age and not able to be arrested. Kyle was the last one to turn himself in at 8 p.m. that night. They had pinned Kyle as the mastermind behind this entire ordeal, and the one who threw the rock that killed Kenneth White and left his 4 kids fatherless. But it's a tricky situation, since all of the boys were under the age at the time of the crime. But with Kyle being born in 1999, he was just about to become a legal adult. With the other 4 boys being accomplices, they had decided to tell the authorities the truth about what had happened on that night. The plan had diverted some since its inception. Genesee County prosecuting attorney held a press conference on October 23rd of 2017. In his press conference, he listed the charges were going to be pushed against the 5 teenagers. Keep in mind, the next week was Kyle Anger's 18th birthday, and the charges were 1 count of second-degree murder, 1 count of conspiracy to commit second-degree murder, 6 felony counts of malicious destruction of property, and 2 misdemeanor counts of malicious destruction of property. Every single one of those are hefty charges, and they were going to be charged as adults in this case, although they did range in age from 15 to 17. However, the 4 boys, with the exception of Kyle, had orchestrated a plan to plead guilty to manslaughter charges and be treated as juveniles in the matter, which would result in lesser charges and the possibility of them being sentenced to juvenile detention centers until they turned 21. But Kyle, on the other hand, had pled guilty to second-degree murder in the death of Kenneth White. When it came to a little over 2 years after the murder, 20-year-old Kyle Anger stood in front of a judge and was handed a sentence to him of 39 months to 20 years behind prison bars. He was given credit for the 740 days that he had already spent in jail since he was initially arraigned in 2017. This was not a good thing to the victims and families of Kenneth White. Although his mother, his fiancée, and his father took the stand asking for harsher punishments brought to Kyle, that is the sentence that he currently has. At the time of this recording, Kenneth could be eligible for parole sometime in early 2021. But although he was almost 18 at the time, I hope that he spends a lot more time behind bars. But whatever happened with Mark Zaleski, Alexander Miller, Trevor Gray, and McCaden Payne? They pled guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter, but all 4 boys have since withdrawn their guilty pleas, as the overseeing judge said that he didn't believe that the juvenile sentencing guidelines were harsh enough for what these boys had done. As of right now, I have not seen any more evidence pointing to whether or not they'll be retried as adults or juveniles in the matter, but again, this is a very upsetting case for the friends and families of Kenneth White. A man just trying to provide for his family and fiancé, just trying to go home from a construction job with his buddy Steven. A senseless thrill that ended up killing this innocent man for no reason at all. And if there is any, I will post an update if I hear more. I just hope that the friends and family get the justice that they rightfully deserve. But even at that young, you should absolutely know not to do stupid shit like that. Not only once, but 10 times they risked the lives of people just driving home, driving to work, trying to get to where they needed to go. And that one time that Kyle got the thrill that he was looking for. Now, I'm not trying to grade how bad these are based on the cases themselves, but this one is going to be, personally, one of the roughest ones of them all. But I'm also going to say that this one actually has a very different outcome. Technology. What a fascinating thing. Thanks to technology, you're listening to my dumbass cover these monsters from your phone. Or desktop. Either way, it's technology. Pretty cool stuff, huh? I've taken deep dives into technology quite a bit over the course of the last 3 years, but I'm not going to dive too deep into this one. But let's just talk about one thing. Programming. I honestly don't know the first fucking thing about programming anything. I can write my own scripts, I can edit my own podcasts, I can even have somebody help out with other things like logistics and publishing. Why? Because your host, Hunter, is arguably dumb. But programming is the blood and bones of the technological body. Your apps have codes, programming, JavaScript, etc. It's a very, very mundane job. I don't have the drive, motivation, or even the intelligence to know how to code or program. But one man definitely did. Alexander Nathan Coutinho was that kind of kid. He was born on December 18th of 1996 and immediately became fascinated with technology. He was born in Joaquin, Texas, and his name changed from Coutinho to Barter. He lived in several locations, including Carrollton, Texas in 2001, then lovely old Phoenix in 2004, and then a very short distance away to Buckeye, Arizona in 2007, then Houston, then back to Joaquin in 2009. He loved to dabble in everything technological. And if you know anything about Mac stuff, they have pretty damn airtight security. And when he learned that he could hack base versions of the Mac operating system using a program that he founded called Windows NT, he started working on different ways to exploit Apple's proprietary software and do all sorts of things. I will note that he did dub the program Macincrash as a play on words with Macintosh. And him founding Windows is not your typical Windows 7, Windows 10. It's WINDOZENT. He also liked to write, and he founded a company called Comics Media in the means of publishing his Net Nanny book series, which none of them came to fruition. But he kept programming and even found himself a bunch of followers with his hacking skills. I cannot overstate how fucking smart this kid was. At 9 years old, he was coding, hacking, programming, doing everything that people spend years and years learning how to do. This is absolutely insane how fucking smart this kid was. He started up more services, like one called Podtricks, in which, you could probably guess it, people would learn the ins and outs of podcasting. That went defunct in 2011. But he also founded one called the EAS Archives, which launched in 2012. And it was an archive database that displayed all sorts of warnings such as emergency broadcast systems, emergency alert systems, Amber Alerts, NOAA weather radio, Conelrad warnings, and I actually had to look up what Conelrad is, but it's an alert that is issued when there is a control of electromagnetic radiation. All of the alerts were documented by their date, time, reason, and duration. Honestly, some truly fascinating stuff. But as a teenager, he found himself more and more glued to his PC. In 2012, it stated that he was struggling with a large onset of depression, and later in 2012, he was diagnosed with clinical depression. But that's the one thing that kept him going, was his programming and his hacking. It felt like it was the one thing that gave him purpose in life. The subreddit was established about the Windows NT software and different exploits within the Windows operating system itself, but also with Mac, Android, iOS, and Linux operating systems. But with an online persona, much as I've described before, people will only see what they want others to see. Like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, it's all carefully curated. People may post about their hardships and their troubles, but a lot of people only post about the good stuff online rather than the darker and more sinister sides. Now, this may shock nobody, but our fucking buddy Alexander was a big fan of the dark web. If you're not familiar with it, the dark web can be accessed by pretty much anyone, and according to the Wikipedia, it says that, quote, "The dark web is the World Wide Web content that exists on darkness, overlay networks that use the internet, but require specific software, configurations, or authorization to access. Through the dark web, private commuter networks can communicate and conduct business anonymously without divulging identifying information like names and locations. The dark web forms a small part of the web not indexed by search web engines like Google, although sometimes the term deep web is mistakenly used to refer to specifically the dark web." End quote. Now, what can you find on the dark web? There's some stuff that could be considered less severe on the dark web, although these are still pretty shitty things. Those things may include phishing and scams, Bitcoin services, bots, and hoaxes. A little higher on the shit tier of the darknet is things such as stealing credit cards, PayPal, and using that for their financing service, which is practically untraceable. Even higher on that totem pole is illicit drug markets, hacking people's social security numbers, and identity theft. Then, I think that the big no-nos that are available are forms of terrorism, planned attacks or hitmen, and illegal pornography, such as sexualized torture, revenge porn, bestiality, and of course, child pornography. Alex, being the bright kid he was, knew exactly what people would be looking for when they try to get him. So he made a little post within the forum that held some of the deepest, most depraved stuff that one could ever imagine. In early October of 2018, Alex, now 21 years old, found himself bored with life. It was all just numbers and letters to him, writing script day after day after day. So he hopped onto the dark web like he had done so many times before, and he decided to post a request. Here is what the post read. "I'd like to try necrophilia and cannibalism, and see how it feels to take a life. If you'd be willing to let me kill you and are in the US, preferably in the South, and can travel by car, contact me." The tried and true story of being so bored with your life that you decide to take the life of someone else. It's not very common, but with Alex, it wasn't just murder. It was murder, rape, torture, and cannibalism. This kid is demented. You know what's even more demented? Somebody actually responded to him. A father had messaged him and had discussed the logistics in which he would be able to help Alexander carry out his disgusting fantasy. He messaged him inquiring about how much it would cost to offer up his 13-year-old daughter to Alex, and then have him rape, torture, abuse, murder, and finally consume the flesh of his teenage daughter. And on the dark web, you can pretty much get anything you want, as long as you have the cash, and of course, cash is king. For days, Father and Alex exchanged messages through text and email discussing the ability of getting his daughter to Alex and finally getting himself a hefty sum of cash. Alex was methodical in his conversations, talking about how much money he had doing web development and the money that he had stolen for other people using the dark web. And then they finally agreed on a price, and also included the motive of how or why this man's daughter would mysteriously become missing. The father was based out of Florida, and Alex tacked more money onto the payload to have him drive her to Joaquin, Texas. They plotted together and decided that the 13-year-old girl would be, quote, mysteriously abducted on a hiking trip that they would all attend together, and then the daughter would be nowhere to be found, but most likely taken by a cartel or by some other means. So now that they had their plan, the settlement of money, and the date was finally set. This 13-year-old girl's last day with her father, and possibly be alive, would be on October 19th, when they would finally meet up and make this grotesque exchange. This young, innocent girl was about to be sold to a bored, depraved, unimaginable monster at the hands of her own father, just so Alex could finally know what it's like to kill someone. And that day finally came, October 19th of 2018. They kept in contact via text message on burner phones. They established their meetup spot. With him, Alexander had brought with a knife, some trash bags, a cell phone, and a tablet. He wanted to document what he was going to do to this young girl. The father had arrived earlier than previously thought, and Alex just wanted to make the exchange and hightail it out of there. They had already discussed how to cover up the abduction and murder, what they would tell the authorities, and the details about how she was going to die. This kid, this computer prodigy, a programming expert, and even a man who made a web archive of Amber Alerts and other nationwide emergency alert systems, would become one of the people that he would end up documenting on his own site. True. Kinda not true. This kid was honestly fucked from the get-go. Alexander was arrested on the spot by a special initiative that launched in 2006 under the President Bush administration called Project Safe Childhood. The person he was talking to was an undercover agent working within the Department of Homeland Security, and they were also working with not only ICE, but with Homeland Security investigations out of Beaumont, Lufkin, and Houston, Texas, as well as Cocoa Beach, Florida. Various other sheriff's departments and other local law enforcement helped take down this fucking monster. When they interrogated him, they had also seized all of his electronic devices, which included cell phones, computers, and anything that could tie him to any additional charges. It was revealed under their investigation that he had a treasure trove of child pornography, so much that he was using social networking in October of 2017 to offer up this disgusting material with people who wanted it. After his arrest, the federal charges of solicitation of murder, solicitation of a minor, attempted murder, distribution of child pornography, conspiracy, and all the other charges that you think that he'd get pinned with, the case somewhat goes quiet for a little over a year. But on December 20th of 2019, an article was posted to the United States Justice Department's website that stated, quote, "A Texas man has pleaded guilty to child exploitation violations in the Eastern District of Texas. Alexander Nathan Barter, 23, of Joaquin, Texas, has pleaded guilty to attempted coercion and enticement of a minor and distribution of child pornography before U.S. Magistrate Judge Keith Gilbin of the Eastern District of Texas." End quote. The possible sentencing for each count is up to a maximum of 240 months, or 20 years, per charge. But again, he was held without bond until his sentencing. Now this is something that I personally wish he could have gotten more for. On September 17th of 2020, which is not that long ago, Alexander Nathan Barter stood in front of a judge and learned his fate. He was handed down the maximum sentence on each count, 2 20-year terms behind federal prison walls to be served consecutively, locking him away for the next 40 years of his life. When he's out, he will be on supervised release for the remainder of his life, but when he gets out, he will be 63 years old. But again, it begs the question of why? How was this kid so smart when it came to computers, technology, web design, coding, and all of that, where he lacked the basic common sense that murder is a bad thing? Especially with him being so technologically inclined, how did he ever think he wouldn't be caught for his crimes? Sure, we all have that morbid curiosity. That's probably why you're listening to this show. But at the end of these 3 stories, was any of it worth throwing their lives away for? Of course not. But like I asked at the beginning of this episode, have you ever wanted to kill someone? For revenge, or just to know what it feels like? Hopefully these cases will make you think twice about it. But that's going to do it for this episode. And if you found them interesting, be sure to hit up the show on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Murder and Such. And if you feel so inclined, you can add yours truly on Twitter, Instagram, the PlayStation Network, Steam, and Snapchat at Huntor27. And like I said earlier, I also got a bunch of hate for shitting all over QAnon for the last episode. So if you could drop a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and say something like, I don't know, QAnon is trailer park Scientology, I will thank you, and I'll even throw some stickers in the mail for you if you can take a screenshot and send them to me. But I would love to thank my executive producers for this episode. So thank you to Caitlin Poehler, Gusto, Strictly Homicide Podcast, the Bama Brew Review Podcast, Angel Renee, Aaron Albertson, Casey Jones, Laura McDonald, which, by the way, go listen to Ivy League Murders. Laura does it, and it's fantastic. Jenna Kagawa, Michelle Pierce, Jax, Martha Pierce, Alex Aguirre, Justin Reebsum, McKenna Nicole, Ariel Safir, Stacy Jenks, Dan Sheridan, Benjamin Welch, Ashley Collier, Ryan Stanley, Charkley Daniels, Erica Summers, Kyle Wesley, Danielle Longamore, Heather Wright with Nature vs. Narcissism and Ohio 88 podcasts, Sarah Thompson, Dakota Curtis, and of course, Ashley Black and Tech Support. And if you'd like to become a patron, you can find my page at patreon.com/murder and such, and you can donate as much as $1 per episode, or if you donate $5 per episode, you can become one of my executive producers. So you can hit that up, help fund the back end of the show, and my ever-expanding back end, i.e. my butt. But as always, my name is Hunter, reminding you to wash your filthy fucking hands, wear a mask, call someone that you love today. Thank you for being a friend, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.
Do you need something to listen to next? Well, check out this other show from Cast Media.
Hi, I'm Jake Deptula.
I'm Jamie Beebe, and we are your hosts of Strictly Stalking.
In each episode, we're going to bring you a new stalking case covering the ins and outs of each stalker, their victim, and their stories.
Is he in the house with you? Does he have any weapons? Yes. What does he have? Is it a gun? A knife? Yeah.
She hated me so much, she found my stepmother, friended her, and then was caught making a plan to attack me with my stepmother. He shows up to my gallery and he's wearing a spacesuit. He looks at me and he goes, "You look like Jessica Rabbit and Lilu from The Fifth Element." And then he looks at me very intensely and he goes, "And I'm going to stalk you."
We hear about the cops not really doing anything or not really caring about the crime of stalking. There's a lot of victim shaming for stalkers.
The predator who'd been stalking me for 44 years was starting to really interfere with my life and my freedom a lot more than he had been.
One of those random messages on my DM. It was like, "I'm coming and I'll see you on this date." I was like, I'm not responding to this. And then it was like a verification of a flight got sent.
All of a sudden, I hear a knock at the door. So I open the door and there's a 6-foot something gentleman standing in front of me with a backpack. And he looks at me and he says, "Are you Aaron?" I'm kind of panicked because this isn't Larry.
He followed me to my workplace and he grabbed me, pushed me into the door and was like, unblock me. Why have you blocked me?"
I'm Jake Deptula.
I'm Jamie Beebe. Strictly Stalking premieres on January 21st.
Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Like, oh my God, this person won't stop texting me, stop calling me. She keeps showing up everywhere. And then that's when it's like, you're like, oh shit.